Okay, so I'm going to work through a few examples from this just because everybody's been asking for them. But if it doesn't work out, let me know and we'll try to troubleshoot from there. So the first problem that we are working on is one that is focusing on the number of internet users from the US measured in millions. And it's given by this quadratic equation. I is equal to negative 1.163 t squared plus 17.19 t squared, or just t, plus 125.9, where t is the number of years since 2020. So for 2020, you know t has to equal 0 because that's at the very beginning. 2021 would be t equals 1, 2022 would be t equals 2, etc., etc. So our goal is to graph this function in Desmos and sketch the graph below, but first we need to be able to label the axes. The first axis that we're looking at is the x-axis, which is actually going to be both x or t, whichever you'd rather. And we said just a minute ago that t is the number of years since 2020, so I'm just going to write that down here. Number of years since 2020. And then my output is my y value, or in this case, my I value. And it stands for internet users in millions. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I know that because the leading coefficient is negative, I'm going to get a frowny face parabola. It's going to be downward facing. It's going to have a maximum point at the very top. That maximum is going to be the vertex. That might be important. We'll find out. Alright, and so now let's just go over to Desmos and graph this. So on your Desmos web browser, you can graph this exactly the same as how I'm doing in the app. Plus 17.19 t squared plus 125.9. You gotta remember to put the negative out front. Now the only difference between what I put here and what I put on Desmos, or what I had on my paper, was that on my paper it said that I was dealing with t values, but I changed that to x because it makes it easier to graph in Desmos. And then if you accidentally have a squared like I did, you can take that away and you'll see this frowny face parabola shape, just like what we're working with. So again, we have our x value across the bottom, y value across the top. Graph this function in Desmos, we did that. Sketch the graph below, label the axes. All right, how many users were there in 2020? So in 2020 means that there have been 0 years passed, so t equals 0, which means that x equals 0, which means that we are looking at the y-intercept. So we are looking at this point right here, our y-intercept. So letter A corresponds to this point right here. Now you can use the c value to tell you your y-intercept. So in this case, our c value would be 125.9. Or you can use Desmos to identify exactly what point that is, and it's 0, 125.9. So 0, 125.9, which means my answer is 125.9, but if you read my units, I'm looking at in millions. So that many millions of users. Part B says when. When means what is the x value? Is there a maximum number of users? So that's looking at this point right here, this max value. Again, I can use Desmos to find my max value. It tells me that it is 7.39, comma 189.4. Alright, so when is there a max number of users? What is the x value? Well, at that point, 7.39 comma 189.42, x equals 7.39, which means 7 years since 2020. So we're looking at the year 2027. All right, part C says, what is the max number of users, which is my y question, in which case I'm looking at the same point because it's still the max number of users, it's still that maximum point, it's still that vertex, it's still the highest point. So there it matters that y equals 189.42, which is the number of millions of users. So 189.42 million users. All right, and the last question, question D, says how many users are estimated in 2023? So how many is a question of what y equals, and users in 2023 means that there are 3 years since 2020, so x has to equal 3. And if x equals 3, then we can make that a second line in Desmos right along here at x equals 3, and have Desmos do a line straight up, and it would actually be over here to the left of our vertex because it came before 2027. And then we can go back to Desmos and type x equals 3 and see that they intersect at that point 3 comma 167. .003. So Desmos told me where that intersected, which means I just need to answer how many users. Well, there were 167 million users. And I'll go back and talk more about the second problem tomorrow, but for now, this should clarify things a little bit.